Oh, you found me. Maybe it's time you know the truth.
That's unlikely to happen, but if these games have taught us anything, it's that even the most remote possibilities can come true. So today, with the recent announcement of the DLCs for Scarlet and Violet, I'm here to share with you my wishes for them. What content I would like to see, what issues that were left pending should be addressed, and how many months of child support does the professor of the other edition owes Arvin? These would be my ideal DLCs to close with a bang the story of this generation. And as it could not be otherwise, let's start talking about the Paradox Pokémon. In the videos I dedicated to them, I already made clear my skepticism about them actually being Pokémon that come from the past or future. And finally, Iron Leaves and Walking Wake arrived to give more strength to that theory. Conceptually, they are even more abnormal and unreal. But we'll see what these DLCs have to offer about their true nature. Believe it or not, the fact that this debate exists in the community seems impressive to me when we are precisely talking about paradoxes, contradictions. That's why my first wish is for it to not end there. It would be great if some more Paradox Pokemon were introduced in both expansion passes. At least judging by the outfits of the protagonists, it seems that the first one is going to have a more traditional aesthetic and the second one a more futuristic one. So maybe the new Paradox Pokemon could be distributed that way. Or even in a third type of Paradox, forms that no one expects and could turn everything upside down again. If we get down to the specifics, we cannot ignore the Great Tusk in the room. The two new Paradox Pokemon introduced not in the DLCs but in the base games, at least regarding their appearance, are far from the famous sketches of the artist of the original expedition to the Great Crater of Paldea. What is the reason for this? Are there forms of the other two Pokemon of the trio that the artist could barely catch a fleeting glimpse of, causing them to be mistaken for being the same, and causing the artist to fuse elements of all three in an attempt to recreate it? Anyway, paradoxes. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Wasn't it that these creatures proliferated only in the Area Zero, where the origin of their existence lies? Whether it's a time machine, Dragon Balls, or an AI stealing Ken Sugimori's art, what are they doing in this Pokemon Erasmus program? Well, the central role of Terrapagos and some possible clues in what little they have shown hint that things are not going to be as gentle as a simple school trip. What was shown in the first trailer looks like a superficial facade to stories that will go much deeper to the core of Paldea. So I think Area Zero will be present in one way or another, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Paradoxes are for me the most exciting variant, for lack of a better term to define them. So give me more of this stuff and I'll make more videos under its hallucinogenic effects. But Paradox Pokemon are not the disease, but one of many symptoms. In other words, they are not the biggest unanswered question we have left. The biggest wish I can make for these games is that they directly address all the mysteries that were left up in the air, or rather that they don't go wherever they want with a totally isolated story that leaves open all the doors that the game opened. But I think it's highly likely that will happen because of one very important detail that everyone is overlooking. The official website shows us that the first DLC, the Teal Mask, will require the player to have spent about 3 hours of gameplay in the treasure hunt. So it looks like it will be similar to Sword and Shield, an adventure independent of the main plot that will not interfere in the main events, so it can be played since the beginning of the journey. But the good news comes with the second one, the Indigo Disc, which contrary to the first, tells us that it will be necessary to have completed the game to access it. This is a great piece of data because if they make us complete the main story to play, is because the events that are coming will be related to endgame content, not by level restrictions or something else, because, for example, in the Crown Tundra, enemies had a level above the champion and you could access it without badges, so it's highly likely that it will focus on answering and clarifying all the questions that were left in the game. Aside from discovering whether or not Terrapagos really is the legendary disc that the Violet book talked about, or if it's again just a big and lovely bait that fits the description, it seems that this second DLC will indeed directly address all the questions that were left unanswered. What are those crystals that seem to be able to materialize unimaginable events? How did they appear in Paldea, and how far do their capabilities really go? What were the real purposes of Professors Sada and Turo in their research? And if ultimately the time machine was not such a thing, what happened to the artificial intelligences with their consciousness? These are all issues that need to be resolved. And this can only be done satisfactorily if this second DLC is placed temporally after all the events of the main game. Unless it happened before, generating some kind of temporal paradox, but everything is already complex enough to complicate the timeline even more. Another small wish related to this, but a little more specific, is to see familiar faces again. Characters of these games, extremely interesting and with immense potential, but who didn't have many opportunities to shine, or they did, but their story was somehow unfinished. I love Team Star with all my heart. They are my children and their story is overwhelming, but I was a bit sad that practically everything we could see of them outside of their battles was limited to flashbacks. Their plot as such was nicely wrapped up, but a big adventure where we could see them all together finally in action is really something we should have seen. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible for them to appear in the first DLC. Being a school trip would be a great opportunity to give them a chance to show up because, after all, they are students, but being able to access it without badges or bases done would conflict with its story, so it will not happen. So the hopes of seeing them remain for the second DLC. The teachers, however, have less direct participation in the plot, so some of them could show up in the first. It would make sense, since being a field trip, some should accompany the students, which could be used to dig more into them. You're so nice! Come on, let's talk about anything. What do you like? But mostly, what do you fear? Yeah, the chairwoman and top champion was the biggest disappointment of the generation to most people, but I still trust her. I see in her eyes that after the generation ends, she will be considered one of the best champions, at least as a character. So please don't play with that hope. As we already saw in the video I made talking a lot about the characters of the game, I love her design and idea, and I even think that leaving in the air a relationship with the Area Zero gave her a certain aura of mystery in order to continue developing her in the future expansion pass. Now, if at the end everything is all smoke and mirrors and she doesn't even appear, I'm gonna take it badly. Because as chairwoman and highest authority of the education in the region, she's also supposed to be in charge of the new Blueberry Academy, so I think it's quite likely that she is going to have an important role in the second DLC. I would even see with good eyes an unexpected twist that makes us see her with suspicion during the game. Last but not least are Arven's parents. It's a joke that something as historical in the series as the death of a Pokémon professor is only mentioned in a line of a Giga Chad android. And so is that nobody expected that the responsible was the legendary of the game box art. So I take for granted that there's also something hidden in that story, and maybe, as was rumored quite a lot in the community, will also the professor of the other editions show up at some point? I understand about those crystals that materialize dreams now. You had to snort it. Like me for the next wish, the last thing I'm craving for these games. Let's talk about the locations where all these events will take place. Those of you who saw my live reaction to the trailer know that it's not a lie. I was convinced it was Legends Johto. Dude, tell me that with those outfits they don't look like Ethan and Lyra. Even the hair color matches, that was deliberate. It's not hard to see the connection. Needless to say, how the traditional Japanese aesthetics of the place is very reminiscent of Johto, practically identical to the Kimono Girls episode on Evolutions. But strangely, the action will take place in a place called Kitakami, which the official website defines as a county, presumably of Paldea itself. But this not necessarily implies Kitakami being part of the original map. Maybe it's just under Paldean jurisdiction. Maybe it's geographically close to Johto. It would be nice if this was a clue to the rumored legend Celebi, which I wish would take place in the future. And well, that this location looks so traditional, almost feudal, would fit quite well to be balanced, but I wouldn't get my hopes up with this, since we know that Game Freak is very given to clickbaits with these things. But it's quite strange that what at first is a province of Paldea has this aesthetic, and if this was not confusing enough, the name of the area in both Spanish and English translations, Norteo and Kitakami, means literally north and God. It's all rather weird, since a northern Paldea naturally makes you think of the famous southern Kalos that was left pending in its day, but no. There is also the issue that with the presence of Terrapagos, it's assumed that at least in the second DLC, the Area Zero will be discussed. But wasn't the center of the region the only way to get there? What I'm getting at is I think it's pretty clear that once again, there's something fishy about all of this, and there's also something strange about these locations. Like so many things in these games, everything is imbued with an unreal air. Without going any further, that the new Pokémon are based on the traditional tale of Momotaro and the obvious parallel of this underwater academy with dreamy technology and the myth of Atlantis fits once again with the inspiration of various elements of this game and idealized and fantastic visions of other periods, past and future. My wish related to this is precisely that all these suspicions are not unfounded, and there really is something in those places that's not what we expect and break our molds when playing. I would venture to say that the very normal and scholarly image that we have been shown is a distracting tactic, and in fact, these DLC do happen in an unreal future and past materialized by the power of the legendary, but that's too much even for me. Even if I really have expectations that these places are much more than a simple trip to the countryside and school exchange, I hope that we continue to descend through the depths of this generation, hand in hand with its mysteries or madness. So these have been my wishes or elements that I think would make these DLC an epic closure to this story. What about you? What expectations do you have for these new games? You can share them in the comments, and if you want more, give yourself a marathon of all the videos about Scarlet and Violet that you have on the channel. Be nice.